Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and thank you for joining me here in Season 4 of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. If you're here for what to think, you've come to the wrong place. I'll give you my view on current events, politics, science, religion, and whatever else from a logical, most importantly, a Christian worldview. But this is more about how to think. Don't just accept what you're told, ask questions and dig deep. Links for the material are in the notes if you'd like to follow along, and with that, let's go be logical Christians. Have you ever known someone who was so smart that he or she was one of the dumbest people you've ever known? Now, sure, you'd never say that to their face, and that, my friend, is gossip, and you need to repent. But if we're being honest, those people definitely exist. I have heard, and to my shame, I guess, I've never verified, that during the development of the atomic bombs, the scientists working on figuring out how to make these things work were so smart and so focused that they had to have handlers, people who would watch over them, make sure they ate, make sure they used the restroom, make sure they slept. I can happily say that I am blessed with a much lesser level of intelligence. Much lesser. Like, not only am I not knocking on that door, I'm not even in the same state as that door. On today's episode, first we'll try to get past that 120-year limit, and then we'll look into the latest, greatest vacation destination, and finally, translating things is hard and funny. So take care of that skin. You're going to need it longer than you thought. Then get ready to head north, or south. I'm not really sure, to be honest. And finally, the more tired you are, the more giggly you'll be. You know, I'm not a smart man, but I know. Here we go. Your days are numbered. It's as simple as that. I mean, mine too, but let's not talk about me. In the original and easily the best Jurassic Park movie, Jeff Goldblum as Dr. Ian Malcolm, discussing the power of evolution, made the comment that life, finds a way. And it does. I think we can agree that life does find a way. Now, is that because of the power of evolution, or is that because of the power of design? Well, I have my belief and opinion. You have the right to agree with me, or be wrong. Just saying. But one thing life hasn't found a way around as of yet is death. Men and women were created originally to live forever, but not like it seems we generally think, inherently. We have no idea how this would have worked, and the only information we have regarding some sort of eternal life in our current form of human is found in Genesis 3, when God was speaking with himself as the Trinity. Quote, "Then Yahweh God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he send forth his hand, and take also from the tree of life, and eat and live forever. And therefore Yahweh God sent him out from the Garden of Eden to cultivate the ground from which he was taken. So he drove the man out, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he stationed the cherubim and the flaming sword, which turned every direction to guard the way to the tree of life." So man wasn't necessarily kept out of the garden. He was kept from the path that led to the tree of life. And man was apparently created with mortality, which could be staved off indefinitely through the fruit of the tree of life. That's all we know. Right? So does that mean that mankind would have had to eat from the tree at some sort of interval? Or was one bite of the fruit good forever? Could a human decide not to eat from the tree and thus live a mortal life, eventually dying at some point? And all we can really do is speculate, because that's all we know. But of course, that's all a moot point anyway, as Ben Franklin famously said, as what some consider to be the last great quotable quote of his before his death, quote, "Our new Constitution is now established. Everything seems to promise it will be durable. But in this world, nothing is certain except death and taxes." And boy, ain't that the truth. And as time ticked on, we saw a gradual, general downward trend in lifespans. Adam lived to 930 years old, Seth to 912, Enosh to 905, Canaan to 910, Mahalalel to 895. Now, Jared bucked the trend, made it to 962, Enoch to only 365, but as we're told in Genesis 5, quote, "Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." We're given at least some sort of idea for when God took Elijah, right? We're given some information about that. But what happened with Enoch? I mean, there's a story that I would really be interested in hearing more about, let me tell you. Enoch had a son named Methuselah, who, not to be outdone by Jared, lived to 969 years. Lamech dropped off quite a bit to 777 years. And then we get to Noah, who lived to 950. But after Noah, the ages dropped off rapidly. Shem lived to 600. Arphaxad to 438. A couple more generations down the line, Peleg, probably one of my favorite Bible names, lived to 239 years old. A few more generations skipped, and we have Terah at 205. Abraham at 175. Skip a few, Moses lived to 120 years old. And then generally speaking, the lifespans of man were basically what we see today, give or take 70 to 80 years, with a handful of outliers who lived to 100 years old or maybe older. So what happened? Well, we don't really know, to be honest. I mean, did God flip a switch in our DNA that limited us way down in potential age? Is it the dyes and preservatives that RFK will save us from, exponentially increasing our potential lifespan almost instantly? One theory, the one I mostly subscribe to, is that the water that used to be above the firmament was actually a canopy of water or ice that surrounded our planet, creating a greenhouse effect, which promoted massive vegetation growth, increased the oxygen content, also caused an increase in air pressure, all combining to create an effect very similar to a hyperbaric chamber, while also filtering out the bulk of the harmful UV rays from the sun, all leading to an environment that facilitated increased healing and lower levels of damage to the body and thus longer life. Now, you won't get any of the current young Earth creation science organizations to defend the canopy theory anymore. They've all kind of given up on that. I think to their shame, to be honest. Not sure what else you do with the waters above the firmament, but, oh well. Now, regardless of the mechanism, it appears that there is a limit to the maximum age a human can live. In fact, just recently, found on Indy100.com, headline, "Scientists have discovered the maximum age a human can live to." And look, I'm not an English prude by any stretch, and I guarantee I end sentences with prepositions all the time, but this is supposed to be a scientific article, and they ended the headline with the word "to." It should have been something like, "Scientists have discovered the maximum age to which a human can live." And that reminds me of another quote, one by Winston Churchill, who was a proper English prude. Quote, "That is the kind of nonsense up with which I shall not put." One of my favorite quotes. Anyway, apparently a research group in the Netherlands did a study on 75,000 people who had died in the Netherlands over the last 30 years. Using the collected data, working some voodoo statistical magic, they determined that the maximum lifespan for a woman is 115.7 years old, and men slightly lower at 114.1 years old. Now, just a few days ago, Tomiko Ituka, a Japanese woman, died at the age of 116 years, 220 days old. She had been declared the oldest living woman and oldest living person back in August of 2024 after Maria Brañas Moreira died, who was 117 years old. And now, Ina Canabero Lucas, slightly younger than Tomiko, at 116 years, 214 days and counting, is the oldest woman. So that seems like they're kind of bucking that maximum age ceiling that was calculated in the Netherlands. One interesting finding from the research team was that the average lifespan of people over the last 30 years has increased, but the maximum age hasn't. So although the oldest person in modern history was Jean Louise Calment, who lived from 1875 to 1997, 122 years, the study found that the lifespan appears to plateau at about 90 years old, with a maximum age of about 115 years. Now, looking to max that out, singer, prophet, pastor, and demonically possessed individual Kenneth Copeland just recently predicted his death date. He's currently 88 years old and has admittedly had remarkably good health throughout his life. That said, the health, wealth, prosperity preacher, who has excoriated his followers for decades about them not having enough faith to be healed of their illnesses, back in early 2023 had to have a pacemaker installed because apparently he didn't have enough faith to keep his ticker ticking at the correct rhythm. But not to be deterred, he announced that he has made and entered into a covenant with God, and on December 6th, 2056, quote, "I'll see y'all later. I'm out of here. 120 years old." And looking up his birthday, yeah, that is exactly 120 years. Now, he also prophesied a few other things that I guess God told him, because he's one of those guys who says he has regular buddy-buddy kinds of conversations with God. I mean, yeah, God has literally come to old Kenny on multiple occasions to seek Copeland's advice on what he being God, should do in certain situations. Yeah, apparently in 2025, there will be a lot of political opposition. There will be less severe hurricanes and storms than in 2024. Hamas will surrender to Israel, and there will never be a two-state solution. Now, to be honest, none of those are overly outlandish. Pretty safe coming from one of God's prophetic pen pals there. I mean, I'm fairly sure I could have, and other political talking heads have, made those same predictions, which all have a very decent shot of coming true. But why did Kenny pick 120 years? Why does there appear to be a ceiling around 115 to 120 years on our maximum lifetime? Well, some would point to the story of Noah. In Genesis chapter 6, we read of a world that's gone out of control, a world that has turned from God almost entirely. Quote, "Now it happened, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were good in appearance, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then Yahweh said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he indeed is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then Yahweh saw that the evil of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And Yahweh regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And Yahweh said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahweh." So there it was. I'm sure you caught it. 120 years. Let me come back to that in a moment. Allow me to digress a bit here. This entire passage, it's a real booger. I and so many others wish that this one was maybe more clearly laid out, for us today. So who were the Nephilim? Well, as you probably know, there are a number of theories, the most prominent of which is that the sons of God were the angels who were cast to earth during Satan's rebellion, who then impregnated human women, creating some demon-angel-human hybrid, who were then those who the mythology of Greek gods and Norse gods, etc., were based off of. Some pastors, who I hold in very high regard, believe this theory to be true. And I've just got to say, tain't no way. We have absolutely zero evidence that angels have genders. Regardless of their appearances as men, that doesn't mean that they were men as we understand men. We have zero evidence that angels have genitalia, functional or not. And we have no evidence of this kind of thing ever happening before or since. In fact, if this was possible, why wouldn't demons still be doing this? Creating demon-human hybrids and overtaking the earth? Makes more sense to say, as the Bible tells us, there were giants in the earth in those days. That's actually how the King James translates what we just read. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. The giants were on the earth in those days. I think we'd be much more accurate to say that there were giants at that time. There were large, mighty men who procreated with women and created just genetic freaks by today's standards. So, next, Yahweh saw that the evil of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now we get this idea that it was an earth full of nothing but murder, theft, rape, destruction, debauchery, and so on. Think of Portland during the BLM riots. And we tend to compare then to now, which logically I'd believe that what we would have seen was a society similar to today, at least on the surface. Sure, there was criminality, maybe even a high level of rampant criminality. But at the same time, you would have had families made up of husbands who loved their wives and vice versa, parents who loved their kids and vice versa. You would have had people taking care of widows and orphans. You would have charities, doctors, people having pleasant interactions with each other. You'd have friends, probably some version of sports and entertainment, and the list goes on. But remember that God looks at the heart, and the hearts of the people had turned away from God, so that all they did was for self. This is who man is today in his unsaved state. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. From the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. But today, just like back then, people who had and have no interest in anything to do with God did things that we would all agree from a human perspective is good. They're good things. Even though from God's perspective, those works are filthy rags because there's no connection to Him. It's all done for self. So the question is, are we at the same point today as the population was in Noah's day? Personally, I don't think we're even close. God found and saved 8 people out of however many hundreds of millions or even billions of people there were. Even if we worked from the most narrow definition of who is saved and who isn't, as a country, as a world, we are nowhere near that same ratio of righteous to unrighteous. Now, let's swerve back onto the main road here. What about this 120 years thing? You can see why this short passage is, as I called it, a real booger. As with the other points I just discussed, there are good pastors on both sides of this debate. The 2 theories as to what it means when Yahweh said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he indeed is flesh, nevertheless his days shall be 120 years, is that this is either speaking of the maximum age man can attain, or that this is the period of time from when God spoke those words to when he sealed up the door of the ark and sent the flood, destroying all of man and land-dwelling animals. Personally, I think it's pretty clear that it's speaking of the time between God making his observations of the wickedness of man and the flood. The way this is phrased, his days shall be 120 years, is stated as an exact figure. God didn't say that his maximum days will be 120 years, that his days will be no more than 120 years, or some other form of that. God said that the days of man will be 120 years. Now, there's some question about Noah's age, the birth of his sons, the construction of the ark, etc., but what we're not told is when God made this declaration as compared to when he spoke with Noah, compared to when Noah started the construction of the ark. Now, I also find the fact that we have 14 or 15 generations from Noah, at least, before we saw the first recorded human living to only 120 years, that being Moses. Even Aaron lived to 123, and this is very suspect with how God stated his limit of 120 years, right? Yahweh didn't say his days will eventually be 120 years, or that gradually his days will become only 120 years. He said, his days shall be 120 years. Now, I see no other instance in the Bible where God's promises are sloppy like this one would have to be if we believed that he was setting a limit to our lifespan. And my previous pastor, when teaching a walk through the Bible, upon reaching this statement, made the comment that it was a maximum lifespan. Now, look, I rarely ask questions in a group setting like that, and I didn't want to contradict him in front of the study group. But in this instance, I did raise my hand, and I asked him about the 120 years, that I thought it referred to the time to the flood, not a lifespan. Looked a little surprised, and then said that, no, it was a lifespan, because later it was limited down again to more like 80 years. And I had no idea what he was talking about, and that number made even less sense because we are absolutely in no way limited to 80 years as humans. So if God limited us, he did a terrible job of enforcing it. So where would he get this idea of 80 years? Well, I found it. That comes from one psalm, the one psalm from Moses, Psalm 90, where he said, quote, "For we have been consumed by your anger, and by your wrath we have been dismayed. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. For all our days have declined in your fury. We have finished our years like a sigh. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or, if due to might, 80 years. Yet their pride is but labor and wickedness, for soon it is gone, and we fly away." So, see, 70 or 80 years. But that wasn't a limit set by God. That was a very general observation made by Moses. So although Moses lived to 120 years, apparently he was seeing people generally dying at 70 or 80 years old during the Exodus. But again, regardless, the 120 years was not a limit, and the 80 years is not a limit. But all that said, we definitely do have a limit. I mean, obviously, and it appears to be somewhere right around 120 years old as a maximum, which is nothing but a coincidence of our current era, and an average lifespan of 70 to 80 years old, which is nothing but a coincidence of our current era. Per Statista, the average lifespan back at the year 1000 was 24 years old. Now, how do they know that? I have no idea. I also have major doubts that that's correct. Could be, don't know, but we do have better data when it comes to the United States, also found on Statista. From 1860 to 2020, they have, back in the mid-1800s, life expectancy at about 40 years old. So, obviously, life expectancy had a major drop-off even from the time of Jesus, and has in the United States worked its way back up to just under 80, taking a slight dip due to COVID and the COVID response and the so-called vax. We've covered the idea of the singularity before, the merging of man and computer, the theory that man's consciousness could be transferred to some AI-controlled computer database which will allow humans to live forever. This, of course, completely discounts man as a created being with a soul. This is a humanist-based theory that equates man to the sum of his memories and thought processes. This is why I discount AI and the singularity, as we aren't just memories and actions. Humanness goes much deeper than that. So, discounting artificial computer-based life, quote-unquote, is there a way to increase the average life expectancy of a human, or to push the upper limits of what we currently see to markedly higher levels? Well, generally speaking, I'd have to think that, yeah, we've likely got somewhat more room to grow with organ transplants, either real or artificial, medical technologies, medicines, joint replacements, etc. We could probably squeeze some additional years out of these aging bodies. But how many years? Well, that remains to be seen. And is there a limit to our lifespans, even with medical technology? And I would have to say, maybe, probably. Found on SciTechDaily.com, headline, "Scientists discover mortality timer inside our cells." So, Cornell University's medical school, Weill Cornell Medicine, did some research on yeast cells and purportedly uncovered something they felt was interesting. All living things are made up of cells. I guess that probably isn't really a shock to you. Inside each cell is the nucleus. That's the core of the cell, basically. The core of the nucleus is the nucleolus. The nucleolus serves some important functions, as do all parts of the cell, obviously. But the nucleolus holds the cell's chromosomes, which, by the way, determines your sex or gender, which are the same thing, which is why transgenderism isn't a thing that exists in the real world. See, your gender isn't determined by physical features or hormones or by your feelings. It's determined by chromosomes, and you can quote me when I say that we will never be able to transition chromosomes in a human at any stage of development. Thus, transgenderism will never be a thing that will ever exist. Sorry, digression. Okay, so along with the chromosomes, the ribosomal DNA, that's rDNA, are contained in the nucleolus as well, which encodes the RNA, which builds proteins. The rDNA can be damaged inside the nucleolus, and if it isn't repaired correctly, it will lead to cell death. Okay, The researchers found that as the cell ages, the nucleolus grows in size, but not gradually over time. They found it actually stays small for most of its life, then right at the end of its life, it grows rapidly. Now, why do we care what the nucleolus does in yeast? Well, apparently because from yeast to common earthworms to humans, the cellular structure and the nucleolus function are very similar. So as the cell ages, at the end of life, the nucleolus grows rapidly, which in yeast at least signals that the particular cell had about 5 more cellular divisions left before it died. And this is what they call the mortality timer in the cell. They further found that the larger nucleoli had less stable rDNA than did the smaller, and the less stable rDNA could be damaged and not repaired more easily, leading to cell death. They also found that the larger the nucleolus grew, the more leaky it became, allowing contamination in the form of proteins to enter, which causes further instability. Now, to me, is the rDNA damaged because of size, or does the nucleolus grow because of damage to the rDNA? And I'm not sure, chicken and the egg, but the key, according to the research team, is the growth. Now, based on their observations, they developed a hypothesis. Now, see, this is science. This is how science should be done. If I were to guess, I would guess that these researchers are believers in evolution. But have you heard one thing so far that would tell you that definitively, one way or the other? No. True observational science simply observes and then tests and hypothesizes and tests some more and analyzes and rehypothesizes, etc. Theories on origins don't need to enter into something like this. So, what is their hypothesis? Well, quite simply, if we keep the nucleolus small, will that keep the cell healthy, thus lengthening the life of the cell, with the end result being longer lifespans of the organism? As one part of their theory, they use the knowledge that one anti-aging strategy people already employ is to eat less. We know that calorie restriction results in smaller nucleoli. Quote, calorie restriction does so many different things, and no one knows the precise way that it is extending lifespan. See, this is not only eating less, but more recently, the fad of intermittent fasting does a large number of good things for our bodies. Of course, not everyone should try fasting, and this is where the disclaimer of consult your doctor should be stated, but from what is known, there are phases of fasting that do different things. Phase 1 is from 0 to 4 hours without eating. This is the anabolic phase, when your body builds muscle. It uses the food in your system and changes that into tissue. The pancreas also produces insulin, which moves glucose out of the blood as well as turning excess sugar into fat. Phase 2 is from hours 4 to 16. This is the catabolic phase. The nutrients from food are now used up, so the body starts breaking down larger molecules of stored energy into smaller so it can be used as fuel. This is called ketosis. Additionally, something called autophagy begins. This is a process of cleaning out damaged cells and proteins and organelles, as well as wiping out infectious bacteria and viruses. Interrupting this process can actually cause cellular mistakes, which can lead to diabetes, cancer, infections, even neurological diseases. And studies show that this is most effective with 16 to 18 hours of fasting, generally as part of your circadian rhythm, or more plainly during your normal sleep cycle. Phase 3 goes from 16 to 24 hours without eating, which is primarily focused on fat burning and autophagy. All food, all easily accessible energy is now used up. Full ketosis is now occurring. Autophagy is ramped up, and now human growth hormone production is increased, which apparently is associated with better memory, increased muscle mass, less water retention, and less stress through the reduction of the stress hormone cortisol. Many people claim extreme mental clarity and a very stable mood during Phase 3. Phase 4 is from 24 to 72 hours. Ketosis and autophagy are going wild at this point. Fat is being consumed as the only source of energy for the brain and body. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, is produced, which apparently is a protein that helps grow and maintain new neurons, leading to better learning, decreased depression and anxiety, and decrease in incidence of certain neurological diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And then finally, phase 5 is greater than 72 hours, and they say it usually ends after 5 days max. Of course, ketosis and autophagy still going strong. BDNF is in full production, and your liver greatly reduces the production of a hormone called IGF-1, which then allows the ramped up production of stem cells. Pretty interesting, right? I've never gone past 24 hours, or close to that. I guess probably went a little past that. I've never done that on purpose, right, with the intent of actually fasting. I'm sure I've gone longer for other reasons, but intentionally, never really gone longer than the 24 hours. And I can tell you that for me, I noticed that after about 15 hours or so, the hunger kind of disappeared. From hours like, 12 to 15, it was kind of miserable. But of course, you can drink as much water as you'd like, and you will, but after about 15 hours, it just kind of tailed off. Now, I can't speak to mental clarity or anything like that. I don't remember, but this is pretty interesting stuff. So why this rabbit trail? Well, it ties into the idea that calorie restriction not only keeps the nucleolus of the cell small, but it does all sorts of other very positive things for the brain and body. And yes, this very likely could stave off aging and increase a lifespan. So back to our research team. They devised a way to tether our DNA to the membrane surrounding the nucleus of the yeast cells, which led to controlling the size of the nucleolus, finding that artificially keeping the size small actually delayed aging in a very similar way to calorie restriction. Now, the research team is a fairly long way from bringing this kind of theory to humans, but their thought is that maybe they could develop a treatment, a therapeutic or a supplement that could be given to humans to extend our lifespans. My thought is, if fasting does this naturally, do we really want a pill or an injection to do this unnaturally? And yes, we absolutely do. Much like exercising is hard and dieting is hard, well, fasting is very hard. Like I said, I was trying it, going about 18 to 20 hours at a time. Tried that for about a month. I didn't like it, but as with so many other things, we just kind of keep finding that the human body was designed to function and repair itself if we allow it, if we help it along by doing natural things. So what is the limit to the lifespan of man? Well, there's no way to know. Contrary to the belief of some, the Bible doesn't tell us. If anything, I would say that living a physical life, eating natural foods, following our body's natural sleep rhythm, drinking natural beverages, understanding natural remedies and natural medications, much like was seen in the days of the Bible, what Moses said, 70, and maybe if someone is very robust, 80 years, would be the norm. Now, today, we're fighting processed foods and endless chemicals, sedentary lifestyles, pollution, and so much more, but we're medicating, operating, and replacing parts and pieces, all with the end result of about 70, and maybe if someone is very robust, 80 years as the average. We've spent a massive amount of time, money, and brain power to simply counteract what we've spent a massive amount of time, money, and brain power doing to ourselves. Simply amazing when you think about it. But to be honest, and I'd argue most people, would never survive the agrarian lifestyle. Look, I have a number of skills, still fairly strong and active. My body isn't totally broken down and shot yet. But compared to Bible times, compared to Bible people, I am a soft, floofy, pitiful example of a male specimen, and I am well aware of that. And to make matters worse, I wouldn't be smart enough to be an intellectual or a philosopher, and I'm not educated enough to be a theologian. Mostly, I would be eaten first, and I would be delicious because I am marbled throughout with fat. But maybe more important than asking how long could we live, it would be better to ask how long do we want to live? And this question has two polar opposite answers. If you're an unsaved individual, You want to live as long as you possibly can. You want to replace, rejuvenate, and medicate anything and any way possible because this is it. If you're unsaved, regardless of how good or bad your life is right now, this is literally your heaven. This is the best you'll ever have. And if you notice, there are both Christians and non-Christians in the medical field, but those who are working hard to dramatically extend life or even extend life into immortality are exclusively non-Christians. On the other hand, if you're a Christian, your concern isn't extending life as long as possible, and immortality in this life is definitely not what you're interested in. This life is a mess. The reason our bodies break down, the mind fails, the organs fail. Well, you know what? Let's let Solomon tell us from Ecclesiastes 12. Quote, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days happen, and the years draw near in which you will say, I have no delight in them." This is speaking of getting old. "Before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened, and clouds return after the rain, and the day that the watchmen of the house tremble, and valiant men bend down. The grinding ones stand idle because they are few, and those who look through windows grow dark, and the doors on the street are shut, as the sound of the grinding mill is low, and one will arise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly." Now he's speaking of teeth falling out, and sight fading, hearing fading, strength fading, and the fact that the older you get, the harder it is to stay asleep. Furthermore, men are afraid of a high place and of terrors on the road. The almond tree blooms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and the caperberry is ineffective. So yes, look, we're injured more easily, we're less stable, we have less energy, we have less strength, and the sex drive dries up, or at least the ability does. "For man goes to his eternal home, but the mourners go about in the street. Remember him before the silver cord is snapped, and the golden bowl is crushed. The pitcher by the spring is broken, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity." Getting old kind of sucks. I mean, look, yeah, we gain wisdom, hopefully, and we see families grow and expand. We can retire and sort of do what we want to do, but the body's failing. The mind is failing. The senses are failing. Even with medical science, we can't continuously fix everything, and the repairs are never as good as the original. So the Christian isn't interested in extending life to new lengths. We're interested in what we've come to accept as natural lifespans, which for us includes medical interventions and medications and the like, and all that's fine within reason. But the Christian knows that for as good or as bad as this life is, this is literally our hell. We may have the best life ever on this planet. Perfect family, perfect job, perfect church, perfect friends, never wanting for anything, just perfectly perfect. And compared to what life will be in eternity, this is hell. So why don't Christians just yeet themselves off this planet instead of living a full life? A life that undoubtedly includes pain, turmoil, sadness, and loss? Well, the Christian knows that God's plan and God's timing is perfect. And as children of God, we have a job, multiple jobs, to do on this planet in the days and years God sees fit to give us. This is why the Apostle Paul kept preaching and kept evangelizing, kept discipling regardless of the beatings, the shipwrecks, the imprisonments, while at the same time admitting that to live is to live for Christ and to do His will. But for him, the Christian, to die is gain. It's better because we will be with our Savior for eternity. And that should really be our focus. We can diet and exercise, we can fast or medicate, we can take advantage of medical advancements, which are blessings from God in their own right. But our focus should be on living for Christ, seeking and doing His will in this world, doing what He has called us and gifted us to do, rather than focusing on desperately trying to squeeze out just a few more months or years while ignoring what's truly important. When I say vacation destination, you may think of the beach or the mountains, or maybe your favorite chair, and please, just everyone leave me alone for a few days. Or you might be more ambitious and think of another country, some exotic destination. Maybe you're into adventure and excitement, so you head into the wild somewhere in order to scratch that itch. When I say name the continents, well, you'd likely start very confidently with North and South America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Those are all a piece of cake. Then it gets a little more sketchy until you remember that the island and country of Australia is also a continent. And then, well, is it the Arctic or the Antarctic? 50-50 shot here. And yes, it's Antarctica. And why? Well, because apparently it's a lot of land, whereas the Arctic is primarily ocean, surrounded by land, and so the Arctic gets hosed on the whole continent thing. Of course, if you're a flat earther, well, I mean, first, you're crazy, but second, you believe that Antarctica is just a huge ice wall that surrounds the entire flat, round planet, I guess. Now, as dismissive as most of us are about Antarctica, apparently this is just a hip-hopping and a happening joint for scientists. Everything we need to know about what's going on this planet can be determined by Antarctic ice. And thank goodness it's not the Arctic we're interested in, because scientists just came out the other day and apparently the Arctic will be iceless by the summer of 2027. Again. Of course, NASA scientist James Hansen, who's been wrong about every single climate prediction he's ever made, said in 2008 that the ice would be all gone by 2018. Not to be outdone, Al Gore said in 2008 that it would be all gone by 2013. Then in 2009, Gore said it would be gone by 2014. Then in 2013, when the ice was supposed to be gone until it wasn't, a study said that it would be ice-free in 2015. And the Navy got in on the action in 2013 also, saying it would be ice-free by 2016. Now, all of those predictions were quite clearly wrong, but I am positive this latest study will be correct. We've only got 2 more years of Arctic ice, and then all the polar bears will drown, or something. But no, we're not interested in perennially disappearing Arctic ice that never disappears. We're interested in Antarctica and its ice. And why? Well, found on sfgate.com, headline, Scientists made an unsettling discovery in the Antarctic. It's likely an omen. So to answer the question as to why we seem to be so very interested in Antarctica, doom. That's pretty much it. Just doom. We know virtually nothing about the area. It's a massive, foreboding wilderness of ice that you and I will likely never go because we'd be crazy to do so. So scientists, especially the ones with quotes around them, and especially the climate quote-unquote scientists, well, they love to use it to tell us how doomed we are. So what's this omen that they discovered that so unsettled them? Well, this article was published right at the end of December 2024, so this doom omen is brand new, cold off the Antarctic presses for you and I. Quote, a surreal phenomenon is unfolding in one of the most barren, mystifying regions on Earth, and according to a recent article from NASA, scientists say that it could be a new byproduct of global warming. Could be. I like how they leave a sliver of mystery there, like maybe it's not global warming, but yeah, we all know it is. Apparently, the Antarctic Peninsula is turning into a lush, green, lawn or garden or something. There's a kind of moss that grows on top of frozen tundras, which makes them look lush and green, sort of. Scientists from the universities of Exeter and Hertfordshire analyzed satellite data from 1986 to 2021 and found that the moss had grown more rapidly than expected, growing from less than 1 square kilometer to about 12 square kilometers. And now most of us have no idea what a square kilometer is, and with good reason. We don't care. So basically, this patch of moss grew from about 212 acres to 2,952 acres. And that sounds like a lot. But if you think of it as square miles, it grew from about a third of a square mile to about 4.6 square miles. So that doesn't really sound like too much, right? To make matters even more insignificant, the Antarctic Peninsula is about 202,000 square miles in area, about 80% of which is covered in ice. So the mossy patch grew from 0.0002% to 0.002% of the total area. Now, you may be thinking, well, that seems pointless to be concerned with, and oh my goodness, you're right. But they say that the region has been really warming up over the last 60 years, so, global warming. They further studied data from the past 150 years. I think you and I can agree that data from 100 plus years ago is totally legit, and found that over the last 50 years, the moss grew exponentially, or as Joe Biden says, exponentially. And now they're confident that it's due to climate change. So this moss is bad. It's real bad, I guess. In a 2017 study, the authors of that study wrote, quote, "The regional sensitivity of moss growth to past temperature rises suggests that terrestrial ecosystems will alter rapidly under future warming, leading to major changes in the biology and landscape of this iconic region." So they were absolutely positive that the way they analyzed the data, it suggested things. Shocker. And if you're not frightened enough already, if this global warming continues, there could be other plant growth. This warming could be, quote, "creating a window of opportunity for non-native species to take over." Except how do the non-native species get there? And how do we truly know that they're non-native? Maybe they're just species that are dormant and are waiting to have the area warm up a bit so they can repopulate. But no, again, this is a people problem. See, there are cruises that go there, and there have been about 80,000 people who have actually set foot on the peninsula and surrounding area over the last couple of years. So, they're all potentially introducing, non-native species of things. And as we know, anytime a non-native species is introduced into a region, everyone and everything in that region dies. Well, that's true, except for the fact that it's not true at all and has never been true, and all sorts of non-native species have been introduced all over the planet, and we, people, animals, and the environment just kind of adapt to move on with life. Now, also, to be clear, although we think of the Antarctic to be nothing but a big block of ice, the outer edges, especially the peninsula, is warmer and has all sorts of vegetation and fungus and other ecosystems. So it's not like we're seeing anything that shouldn't be there. They're just seeing something their models didn't predict. But remember, their models are garbage. If we're just being honest, they've built models based on what is, with nothing but assumptions about what was and what will be, slathered with their own biases regarding man-caused global warming. So the output of the models are simply confirmation of what these scientists believe anyway. In other words, the models are virtually useless and definitely unnecessary. They're built to say that anything outside of what we see right now is because of man-caused global warming. Quote, according to the December NASA story, it's still unclear which plants are part of this blooming area and how they're changing the fabled Antarctic landscape. We need to go to these places where we're seeing the most distinctive changes, Exeter University researcher Tom Rowland told the agency, and see what's happening on the ground. So they don't know what's going on or why, but they're pretty sure it's global warming because what else could it be? And hear me out. Let's go to the most recent article I have here from just a few days ago, found on iflscience.com. Headline, 90 million years ago, Antarctica had a lush rainforest and dinosaurs. Well, that seems like that's more than just moss that this barren, icy wasteland had, 90 million years ago. We have the perfect opening paragraph, I just gotta say, quote, a mere 90 million years ago, Antarctica was a radically different place. Instead of being a polar desert characterized by colossal ice sheets and glaciers, it may have been a swampy land of rainforests dominated by ferns and conifer trees. So it was different because it may have been different. Got it? This is science. In the same region as our nearly completely moss-covered Antarctic Peninsula, remember, that's 0.002% coverage. A core sample was drilled and extracted in 2020 by scientists from the Alfred Wegener Institute in Germany and the Imperial College London. Knowing that they got down to 90 million years ago, they found, quote, ancient soil that was rich in preserved roots, pollen, and spores, indicating that the continent was once abundant in plant life. Now, before we proceed, how do they know they made it to 90 million years ago deep with this core sample, you may ask. And even if you didn't ask, I did. And as long as you're too lazy to hit stop or to skip ahead in this podcast, you're along for the ride, so here we go. There are a few ways the ice cores are dated, and your assumption as to the age of the Earth has a direct effect on how you arrive at the value. Your general evolution-based scientist will say that the ice and snow has been accumulating for hundreds of thousands or millions of years. One very basic method of dating is to count the layers in the ice. There are generally very distinct ice layers all along the core samples, which they want to claim are summer and winter layers, so basically 2 layers account for a year. Thus, hundreds of thousands or millions of very thin, highly compressed layers just need to be counted and divided by 2, and then you get your years. That's a very basic idea. The reality is that those layers have nothing to do with summer or winter. They're actually just periods of warmer and colder, so you could theoretically have dozens of layers every year if you had enough temperature variation to cause some slight melting, then refreezing, etc. And that's really what we see. Answers in Genesis has a display at the Ark Encounter in Kentucky of what has been termed the Lost Squadron. I have a poster of said Lost Squadron on a wall in my basement alongside a light-up replica of this Lost Squadron. The summarized story on the poster is as follows, quote, in 1942, 6 P-38 fighter planes and 2 B-17 bombers were forced to land on the ice of Greenland. The planes were abandoned and practically forgotten. Nearly 40 years later, a search was made to recover the planes, but they were not located until 1988 when advanced radar spotted them 250 feet beneath the surface. In 1992, an expedition bored a hole into the ice and retrieved the plane piece by piece. This plane, now known as Glacier Girl, has been restored and was flown once again in 2002. The fact that these aircraft were buried under more than 250 feet of snow and ice in less than 50 years, and that the borehole from the Lost Squadron expedition revealed more than 50 annual layers, exposes the unreliability of using so-called annual layers as a dating method because multiple layers can form every year. Observational science supports the biblical timeline and contradicts popular teaching about millions of years. So, per previous beliefs of scientists and their theoretical rate of ice accumulation, at the depth they found this plane, it would be calculated to be there for about 3,000 years, but it was only there for about 50. Now, as for layers, I couldn't find where they actually counted the number of layers of ice, and I'd almost guess they decided against trying to count the layers, because that just simply wouldn't help their cause at all. The other way they try to date these ice cores is using one of the various dating methods, looking at isotopes of various elements to determine how old that layer is. The problem is that dating methods are based on circular logic. In order to select the correct dating method, you must first determine, or guess, the date range of what you're wanting to date. You do that by using assumptions based on depth of the core, the assumed snow or ice accumulation rates, or maybe by fossils found in the layers which have been given their ages based on locations on the evolutionary scale. Basically, you say, I think the bottom of the ice core is around 1 million years old. Can you use the correct dating method to tell me that the ice core is around 1 million years old, please? Per science, quote unquote, carbon dating, or more accurately, radiocarbon dating, which is the most commonly referenced dating method, is only good up to 70,000 years. Potassium-argon, or argon-argon dating, those are both good for about 1,000 years to billions of years. Uranium-lead dating is good for 10,000 to billions of years, and there are other dating methods that have certain time boundaries, or theoretical boundaries as well. So you need to know what you have, what you're testing in the sample, what you're looking at in the sample, and then decide how old about you think your sample is, then have it tested to simply confirm your theory. It's really nothing but a silly, ridiculous game, to be honest. You could just put any number on that thing and call it good. So back to our Antarctic rainforest, they drilled down, pulled up a core, tested it based on the assumptions they already made, based on the depth, the layers, etc., then found that their assumption was correct. It was about 90 million years old. In fact, just the other day, a number of articles came out about how scientists drilled out a 1.2 million year old ice core from the Antarctic bedrock. They hadn't tested it. They had nothing at that point to say it was 1.2 million years old. They just knew it was because they assumed it was, based on the depth, and pretty much that's the story they're going with. This 1.2 million year old core was a 4-year effort by scientists across Europe. And why? Well, to give us all sorts of data on, quote, how Earth's atmosphere and climate have evolved, offering crucial insights into the dynamics of ice age cycles and the role of atmospheric carbon in climate change. Can you imagine what could have been done with that money and intelligence had it been used for something legitimate? But no, it was done for basically one reason, to prove that we're destroying our climate, and that's pretty much all. Now, just to be clear, they did confirm that the ice core was 1.2 million years old by using one of the isotope analysis methods based on the assumption that it was 1.2 million years old. And ironically, or maybe shockingly, amazingly, what they assumed is what was verified. And now we can analyze what's in the ice to find out how greenhouse gases kill the planet and how humans are bad and fossil fuels are bad and we're all going to die because I won't drive a Tesla. No, well, they don't want me to drive a Tesla because Elon is now evil. I guess because I won't drive a Rivian or a Ford Mustang Mach-E, which isn't a Mustang at all in any way, shape, or form. If all it takes to make something a Mustang is to apply the Mustang badge on the body somewhere, then I guess I can slap a Mustang badge on my Chevy truck and we'll call that a Mustang too. Anywho, our 90-million-year-old ice core has all sorts of stuff at the bottom that surprisingly suggests the Antarctic used to be a tropical rainforest, complete with dinosaurs. And the shocking part, according to the article, is that this appears to be true even though there are winters of total darkness, 4 months, where there's literally no sun, but plant life apparently thrived there, 90 million years ago. Quote, the preservation of this 90-million-year-old forest is exceptional, but even more surprising is the world it reveals. Even during months of darkness, swampy, temperate rainforests were able to grow close to the South Pole, revealing an even warmer climate than we expected, Professor Tina van de Vliert, study co-author from the Department of Earth Science and Engineering at Imperial, said in a statement in 2020. The scientists believe the average temperature back then near the South Pole was about 54 degrees Fahrenheit, similar, I guess, in climate to New Zealand. Now, here's what we absolutely know for sure per this article. Quote, this period, the mid-Cretaceous, was the hottest period in the past 140 million years. Sea levels were also extremely high, with the ocean being around 170 meters or 558 feet higher than it is today. The Cretaceous period, 145 to 66 million years ago, is also known as a heyday for dinosaurs, as it was a time when many diverse species thrived, including iconic groups like Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops. Dinosaurs even lived in Antarctica around this time. In recent years, paleontologists have discovered a treasure trove of dinosaur fossils on the continent. It's equally unsure how large animals managed to live through the 4-month polar nights, although they might have migrated in the winter or developed some other survival mechanisms. So, if I want to go and pull out the facts, this is what's passed off as facts. The Cretaceous period is 145 to 66 million years ago. The Cretaceous period is the hottest period in the past 140 million years. Oceans were 558 feet higher than they are today. Dinosaurs thrived in this period. Dinosaurs lived in Antarctica. Paleontologists have discovered a treasure trove of dinosaur fossils. Dinosaurs might have migrated. Dinosaurs may have developed other survival mechanisms. Now that's what science tells us is fact. Out of those, what do we actually know for sure? We know this. Dinosaurs lived in Antarctica because paleontologists have discovered a treasure trove of dinosaur fossils. And that's all. The rest is simply nothing but guessing. Some of them are logical assumptions, some of them are based on very spurious evidence, but all those other facts are nothing but guesses. The article goes on to say that today there are only 2 species of vegetation that are native to Antarctica, and those are starting to become more common to see because of rising temperatures. And that appears to be changing as well because other invasive species, including, quote, lawn grass, are being introduced. The article does actually end with a very astute scientific statement, but I doubt they realized it at the time. Quote, since the South Pole is still dominated by giant ice sheets, it is difficult to imagine it returning to a lush forest, and that is still unlikely to occur anytime soon, despite its recent warming trend. However, All of this should serve as a reminder that very few things remain unchanged for long on planet Earth. And bingo! So if we realize that very few things remain unchanged for long, why are we pumping money, intelligence, effort, equipment, and technology into destroying economies and developing as well as developed nations in order to keep everything exactly the same as what we've determined it should be? So here's what we know. Regardless of your worldview of an old or young Earth, evolution or creation, we know that there has been at least one major ice age. That's the one that happened a few thousand years ago and has been receding for a few millennia now. If the ice age started and progressed and is now receding, why do we think that ice loss today is a bad thing? Or more accurately, a wrong thing? I mean, bad is subjective. And yes, if all the ice melted and if all the oceans were 500 feet higher, well, would that be bad? I mean, it would be bad because we aren't set up for that. Of course, just as we do with literally everything, we adapt as we go. 500 feet of sea rise and ice caps melting, Antarctica turning into a tropical rainforest, that's not going to happen overnight. It would be centuries, probably millennia, before we saw that end result. And something tells me that people would, migrate and humanity would adapt, the planet would be fine, ecosystems would adapt, and so on. If the sea levels rose and we just kept doing what we do, ignoring the fact that we had a foot of water on the floor and then we had houses that were completely underwater, and suddenly we, who used to be well inland, are now on the coastline, and we continue to do nothing, well, we get what we get, and we don't throw a fit. Put simply, if we don't adapt, we die. But throughout all history, rather than just sit there and die, we adapt because we're not stupid, generally speaking. Although this climate hysteria doesn't back up that statement all that well now, does it? I've mentioned it before, but Answers in Genesis, as well as other young Earth biblical creation organizations, have their theory as to how the Ice Age happened. We know at least one Ice Age happened. The evidence is overwhelming. Evolutionists have no explanation as to why we've had Ice Ages. They give their theories, but most of their theories are really more or less scare tactics to tell us that we must make massive changes in order to avoid man-caused climate change. Creation science actually has a plausible theory. This all ties back to the global flood of Noah's day. So, massive rain, water from under the crust burst up and out, the entire globe was covered with water. Along with this, you would have had massive other activity that would have had to have happened. It would be impossible for this stuff not to happen. That would include global earthquakes, massive cracks in the Earth's crust, volcanic activity under the water and above the water, blowing massive amounts of ash into the atmosphere. Observational science finds massive volcanic deposits mixed into the sedimentary rock, which backs up this logical theory. The massive amount of ash that had to be associated with the volcanoes would have been blown up into the atmosphere, which would have reflected sunlight and blocked the sunlight, while the Earth would still be radiating heat up and out, resulting in a cooling Earth. They estimate that with the amount of ash that would have had to have been present in the atmosphere, it would have only taken maybe 3 years for the Ice Age to begin. And with continued volcanic activity, it would have sustained the Ice Age for an extended period of time. We know from observational science that there was extreme volcanic activity during the Ice Age. Now, over time, ice would have formed at the coldest points on the Earth, grown outward until it reached a point where ice was no longer sustained. This ice would create ice bridges, and the water in the oceans being sucked up into massive sheets of ice would have uncovered land bridges on other parts of the planet. Then as the planet calmed down, as the volcanic activity ceased, as the ash dropped out of the atmosphere, the planet would start warming again. The warming planet would melt the ice sheets, the Ice Age would recede, the oceans would rise, the bridges would be covered back over, the continents would take their current shape based on water level, not based on Pangea, which is a ridiculous theory, and the world we know today would gradually take shape. And that brings us to today. Now, based on the fear-mongering of scientists today, I think we could rightly conclude that when ice covered half of the North American continent, they would have been freaking out when they saw the ice receding. They would have been telling us how the land bridges would disappear, we'd all be isolated, how the woolly mammoth would be affected, how our economy based on ice, I guess, would be destroyed, and how everyone would die. They'd argue that we need to do something to cool the planet in order to keep the ice sheets where they are, and we'd look at that and say that that's stupid, and we'd be right. But scientists today would say that's stupid because we know that we don't want that much ice. We want the amount of ice we have right now. And that's where I have to ask, why? What evidence, what data do we have to think that the amount of ice we have in the world right now is the correct amount, or that the ocean levels are at the correct level, that the global temperature we have currently is the correct temperature? And the answer is that we have no evidence or data. We simply have wants and desires. We want things to stay the same, so we desire the climate to stop changing. But as the last sentence of the article said, quote, all of this should serve as a reminder that very few things remain unchanged for long on planet Earth. So what are we doing? Climate so-called scientists, read that as educated people reliant on the money generated through climate hysteria, politicians and global elites have been gaslighting generations of people, emotionally and psychologically manipulating them to believe that we are the problem, that we're causing the planet to warm, and that we'll all die if it continues. I had a recent discussion, wasn't an argument, it was a discussion on Facebook with someone who had responded to an article saying 2024 was the hottest on record, because of course it was. His comment was, quote, I wish I was stupid enough to laugh at this, LOL. Being too stupid to sense danger has to be so relaxing. Now, he didn't have any punctuation in that, so it took a moment to figure out what he was saying, but once I figured it out, that's what he was saying. And someone responded to that saying, quote, ignorance truly is bliss. Now, I responded to both of them with, quote, simple question, what is the correct global temperature supposed to be, and how do we know? Now, the second guy just put his little laughy emoji on there because he's got nothing. But to his credit, the first guy actually responded. Now, unfortunately, it appears he's deleted all of his responses, which was the smart thing to do because he showed that he didn't actually care about facts. He cared about what he was told to believe. His initial response was something like, I don't know, but I know there are college-educated people who are really smart, and they're saying this is bad. Now, that's not exactly what he said, but it's very close. We had a respectful discussion. I pointed out so many of the problems with this theory, sent him a link that I've cited on here a number of times of newspaper articles from climate experts who have predicted doom, and they've been wrong every single time. His response was to first try to discredit the owner of the website, and then when I pointed out that these were literally just screen snips or scans of newspaper articles of predictions that dramatically failed, he said that they were just newspaper articles. Now, that makes no sense to you and I, but it made sense to him. Those are just nothing. But experts saying things today, that's truth. He stated that he literally thought that if we continue doing what we're doing, we will destroy the planet and give our great-grandchildren a barren wasteland, all because we want to party it up right now. And then he stated that I didn't believe it because I was too scared to give up my current lifestyle. Now, he's sort of right. I don't want to give up my current lifestyle. I generally like my life as it is. But he was wrong about me being scared. I don't want to give it up because I see no reason to give it up. My car, my HVAC system, well, it isn't hurting anything because it simply can't. He was, in fact, the one who was terrified about the future because he's been psychologically manipulated to be terrified of the future. Now, honestly, I feel sorry for the guy. I looked on his Facebook page, and from the little I could see, it was pretty obvious he wasn't an overly educated person, just kind of an average Joe, a younger guy, just working his way through life. And he's got evil, nefarious, lying, or equally duped people telling him that he's the problem and everyone is going to die. And that is quite simply put evil. The reality is that when God created this planet, it's pretty universally agreed that the landmass created, surrounded by water, was a very friendly climate, probably a tropical climate, likely a very stable temperature year-round. When the flood happened, land sunk down, other land rose up, the crust broke into large plates, the earth quite possibly was knocked off its axis, causing it to have a wobble, and the climate changed. The Ice Age came, the Ice Age receded, and we are currently still in a period of recession with literally no idea how much ice, if any, this planet is supposed to have, or what the steady state global temperature should be. Now, along with that, we have no idea if the Arctic is supposed to be ice-free, or if Antarctica is supposed to be covered in a tropical rainforest. Should God tarry a few thousand more years, it's quite possible that the temperature of the Earth would rise another 10 degrees or more. The ice would all be melted. The look of the planet would be completely different. And then, as all things are cyclical, if the Earth were to start to cool again, even just a little bit, I'm sure that scientists would be screaming about how we need to keep the Earth hot, or we may find ourselves with ice and snow, and that would be devastating to life on the planet. All summed up, we are a silly species. I've mentioned the Peter Principle before. The idea is that in your job, you're promoted until you land yourself in a position where you're completely incompetent. At that point, you're stuck. You can't go up. They won't demote you. And those below you are stuck with your incompetence above them doing stupid things that they have to fix. I think, as the human race, we're moving more and more into the Peter Principle. We've educated ourselves to a high level of ignorance, and now we have the most highly educated and ignorant people making decisions for the rest of us, and we're stuck with trying to fix what they're doing. You see, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. We've lost the fear of God. We've substituted it with the fear of man, the fear of nature, and as such, we have increased in knowledge and decreased massively in wisdom. And my goodness, does it show. Don't let yourself be duped into believing the gaslighting and fear-mongering of the unwise. Educate yourself, acquire wisdom, and start with the fear of God, which can be found through the reading and studying of your Bible. So I said early on in this podcast that not everything I'll be discussing will necessarily be Christian or faith-oriented, and this will be one of those segments. Now, this will not be a new recurring segment. This won't be a regular thing, necessarily, but I came across this article, and frankly, I just had to share this with you. Found on Upworthy.com, headline, Idioms from around the world that become hilarious when translated into English. I mean, bottom line is, these were just really too good not to share. So as a quick refresher, the author gives a few examples of idioms common to us English speakers, or maybe just Americans, I'm not really sure. Some examples are hit the hay, tie the knot, or kill two birds with one stone. It's a phrase that if taken at face value, like, say, raining cats and dogs, may sound absolutely ridiculous or terrifying, but thankfully the meaning is something different from the actual words being used. Idioms aren't exclusive to the United States. You may be shocked by this. And translating anything from one language to another runs the risk of going horribly wrong. Or hilariously wrong. And that brings us to this short article with 7 idioms from around the world that you may want to start using in your everyday life. Now, one caveat. I can't exactly guarantee that I say the original idiom in the original language correctly. I'm going to try my best, but this is just a quick segment. Not going to do the work, to ensure I pronounce each word correctly. Sorry, not sorry. First, an idiom originally in Swedish. Nu ska du få dina fiskar varmda. See what I mean? Translated into English, now your fishes will be warmed. This basically means the same as your goose is cooked, which means it's all over, man. It's all over. You've made your bed, now you're going to have to lie in it. They also, as a bonus, say, Nu har du satt din sista potatis, which translates to, now you have planted your last potato. Which, to be honest, if I had some big Swede, man or woman, tell me I have now planted my last potato, I would start getting ready to meet my maker. Our next idiom comes from Italy. Aver gli occhi foderati di prosciutto. Now, I know the word prosciutto and yum, am I right? But this one translates not to something so much yummy, but rather to have one's eyes lined with ham. This basically means you can't see something that's right in front of your eyes. You're blinded by something, say blinded by love, for example. So don't let that happen to you. Just get that ham out your eyes. Next from Iceland, I'm pretty sure I nailed that one, especially since most of the symbols in those words of the idiom aren't actually letters I've ever seen before. This one translates to lay your head in water. Now, that sounds not fun, generally speaking. I mean, I can't think of a time where I'd just like to lay my head in water. Even if you're lounging in the pool on one of those nice little floaty things, you don't generally want to lay your head in the water. But this one, in Iceland, where the water sounds like it's probably cold, basically means that you just need to sleep on it, before making a decision. So next time you're faced with a big decision, just tell the other party that you need to lay your head in water and then walk away. Don't explain it. Just walk away. If they don't understand what you're saying, well, maybe they need to get the ham out of their eyes. Next, in the beautiful Arabic language, at tikrar yu'alem al-khimer. If you think that practice makes perfect, well, then I think you'll absolutely agree that repetition teaches the donkey. Right? I mean, honestly, I wish my memory was better than it is, because I really want to use some of these phrases. I mean, next time the kid has trouble mastering something, well, you know what they say, repetition teaches the donkey. Moving to Germany, we get Ich verstehe nur Bahnhof. And I'm sorry, but the German language just makes me uncomfortable all the time. It's such an angry language. This one is fairly harmless, I think. To be honest, I'm not actually sure, as it translates to I only understand train station. And I'm not sure what kind of life you'd have to have lived for train station to be the only thing you understand. Now, apparently this means something like it's all Greek to me, which means you've encountered something you just don't grasp. Now, I have got to remember some of these. I mean, that one is fantastic. And we get a bonus saying from the land of Germany also, Nicht mein Bier, nicht mein Sorgen, which means not my beer, not my worries, which is basically the same as I immediately thought, and this article confirmed, not my circus, not my monkeys, which apparently didn't come out of English either. It came from a Polish proverb. I don't know. I only understand train station. Moving into Norway, we get a snack rett fra leveren, and no, despite what it looks like, it has nothing to do with a snake. This one actually translates, obviously, to speak directly from the liver. This is apparently saying something bold and blunt, no sugarcoating. From the article, it says this, quote, "This dates back to a time when the liver was thought to be the magical organ that produced courage. So, speaking from the liver is just like speaking from the heart, only down and to the right a little." And finally, coming from the land of China, Mama Hoo Hoo. No, I didn't say Mama Juju, and if you're an office watcher, that will sound familiar. Mama Hoo Hoo, which translates to horse, horse, tiger, tiger. This is basically saying something is just kind of, meh. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just kind of in the middle. It's just fine or okay. Hey, Dan, how's it going? Oh, you know, horse, horse, tiger, tiger. And that's it. There are some new sayings that you can use, I believe, right? Just have to remember them. So start that now, just to remind you and me of these sayings. Now your fishes will be warmed. Now you have planted your last potato. To have one's eyes lined with ham. To lay your head in water. Repetition teaches the donkey. I only understand train station. Not my beer, not my worries. Not my circus, not my monkeys, for those who had never heard that one. To speak directly from the liver. And horse, horse, tiger, tiger. So I guess, look, choose your favorite one or two, work them into your everyday lexicon, and enjoy the looks you get when you tell someone that they've just now planted their last potato, or that you're terribly sorry, but you only understand train station. Well, we've reached the end of this episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I know, I'm not happy about it either. If you found value in this podcast, like, rate, review, and share if you wouldn't mind. Don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Against logic, there is no armor like ignorance. Lawrence J. Peter. If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Jesus. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.